My parents kicked me out of Easter dinner because I refused to sell Grandpa's farm. My name's Jake Miller, and at 19, I was already the man of the family, according to my mom. Not because I'd accomplished anything impressive, just because I paid bills that weren't mine. I spent my days turning wrenches at Ted's garage outside Des Moines, Iowa, hands perpetually stained with grease that no amount of scrubbing could remove. Every morning started exactly the same. Alarm at 5:30 a.m. Quick shower. Burned toast if I was lucky. By 6:15, I was already at work while most kids my age were still sleeping off whatever happened the night before. The radio played country music all day while customers complained about our prices, even though Ted hadn't raised them in years. At the end of each workday, I divided my paycheck like it was some sacred ritual. $200 went into my checking account. $150 went into an envelope labeled Megan's College Fund for my 17-year-old sister. The rest barely covered gas, food, and occasionally hanging out with the few friends who hadn't left our town yet. Mom always nodded approvingly when I handed over that envelope. "You're the man in the family now, Jake," she'd say, as if my dad wasn't still around, driving his semi-truck across state lines and showing up once a month for dinner. I didn't feel like a man. I felt like a walking ATM. The drive home each day took me past all the landmarks of small-town Iowa life. Miller's Creek, where I used to fish as a kid. The Super Value where Mom worked as a bookkeeper. The high school where my sister Megan ruled as queen of the cheerleading squad, with her 20,000 TikTok followers watching her dance routines while I struggled to get grease out from under my fingernails. Megan called me the tractor guy whenever her friends were around, like it was some kind of insult. What she didn't understand was that being around tractors, specifically at Grandpa Henry's farm, was the only thing that kept me sane. One Friday evening, I couldn't face going home. So at Oakwood Drive, I turned right instead of left and headed toward Grandpa's farm, 20 miles outside town. Gravel crunched beneath my truck tires as I pulled into his driveway. The white farmhouse needed a fresh coat of paint, and the red barn door hung slightly crooked from last year's windstorm. But this place had something our cookie-cutter subdivision could never have: character, history, purpose. Grandpa Henry stood on the porch waiting, as if he'd somehow known I was coming. At 78, he still maintained a firm handshake and could outwork guys half his age. Vietnam veteran, widower, farmer, a man who said little but meant everything. "Just in time," he called out as I climbed from my truck. Tractors acting up again. We spent the next few hours fixing his old John Deere. Grandpa didn't believe in idle chatter, but when he spoke, I listened. His hands, weathered and spotted with age, still moved with precision, showing me how to adjust the timing, replace the fuel filter, check the hydraulics. As the sun set across his cornfields, he invited me in for dinner. His meatloaf and apple pie put any restaurant to shame. We ate on the porch as fireflies began appearing across the darkening fields. Only then did he tell me about his friend from Vietnam who had given him something special, a jar of rainbow-colored corn seed, supposedly capable of producing the sweetest corn anyone had ever tasted. Grandpa disappeared inside, returning with an old mason jar filled with kernels in shades of blue, purple, red, and gold. He placed it in my hands, and there was something almost ceremonial about the moment. "This isn't just seed," he said, his eyes reflecting wisdom I couldn't yet comprehend. "It's time itself. You plant it when you're ready, not before." I nodded like I understood, though I wasn't sure I did. That was how things often went with Grandpa's lessons. I'd only grasp their meaning months or years later. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the moment. Megan's text read, "When are you sending dollar? Need new dress for formal. 911. Grandpa noticed my expression change. He didn't pry, but his eyes took everything in. My sister treated my bank account like her personal shopping fund. Mom had somehow decided I should support the family, while still being treated like a kid in every other way. Dad existed mainly as a voice on the phone, discussing traffic and fuel prices. Meanwhile, whatever dreams I got smaller and more distant each day. Family troubles? Grandpa asked. I nodded, not wanting to burden him. But as always, my frustrations came pouring out anyway. How Mom treated me like the household provider, but never asked what I wanted from life. How Megan laughed whenever I mentioned maybe farming someday. How Dad just stayed quiet, neither helping nor hindering. Grandpa listened without interrupting. When I finally ran out of words, he looked across his fields, now silvered with moonlight. "People take, Jake," he said finally, "but the land gives. You choose who you want to be with." That sentence stayed with me during the drive back to town, the darkness broken only by my headlights and the distant glow of Des Moines ahead. A constant reminder of the life waiting for me. The garage, the envelopes of cash, the expectations. The next morning at work, Ted noticed I was quieter than usual as I replaced the alternator on Mrs. Johnson's Honda. "Sister asking for money again?" he asked, handing me a wrench. I grunted in confirmation, focusing on the task at hand. "Tell her you're sending her an invoice for oil changes next time," Ted suggested with a laugh. Sometimes family doesn't understand what it means to actually earn something. That made me smile despite myself. "Sisters are like taxes, boy," Ted continued, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "You pay up, don't ask questions, and try not to think about where the money actually goes." The week dragged on. Thursday night, Mom called to remind me about Sunday dinner, finishing with her usual "don't forget the envelope" before hanging up. Not "love you" or "how are you doing?" just a reminder about money. Friday afternoon found me underneath Mrs. Peterson's ancient Buick when my phone rang. I ignored it until Ted kicked my foot. "Take it," he said. "Might be important." The caller ID showed Grandpa. I slid out from under the car and answered. "Hey, Gramps, what's up?" It wasn't Grandpa's voice that answered. It was a woman, professional and detached. "Jacob Miller? This is Mercy Hospital. We have you listed as the emergency contact for Henry Miller." The world stopped. The garage, the smell of oil, the sound of Ted's radio, everything faded away. There was just this voice explaining that Grandpa had collapsed in his field, that the neighbor found him, that the ambulance came, but it was too late. Heart attack, they said, quick and relatively painless. I don't remember driving to the hospital. I don't remember walking through the automatic doors or talking to the nurse at the front desk. But suddenly I was standing in a room too clean and sterile for a man who lived with soil under his fingernails, holding Grandpa's jacket. It smelled like tobacco and pine soap and early mornings checking crops. The nurse said he went peacefully, that the neighbor found him collapsed near his tractor. I could picture it clearly. He was out checking his corn. The land was the last thing he saw. Somehow that seemed right, even though everything else felt wrong. Back at the garage, Ted took one look at my face and sent me home. "Take all the time you need," he said. His usual gruffness softened. "Family comes first." Family. The word echoed strangely as I drove toward my parents' house, but turned at the last minute, heading instead to the farm. Grandpa's farm. The gravel announced my arrival, but no one came out to greet me. Inside, the house felt both familiar and foreign without him. In the kitchen, 2 coffee cups sat on the counter, one empty, one still half full. In the living room, his reading glasses rested on a farming magazine, everything waiting for a man who would never return. My phone kept buzzing. Mom wanted to know where I was. Megan needed money for her dress, with 3 exclamation points. But all I could think about was a jar of rainbow corn sitting on Grandpa's shelf and his voice saying, "Plant it when you're ready." I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for any of this. That night, I slept in Grandpa's bed, surrounded by his things. Outside, the corn rustled in the breeze, a sound that must have lulled him to sleep thousands of nights. To me, it sounded like whispers, like the land trying to tell me something I wasn't yet prepared to hear. Morning came a phone call that pulled me from restless sleep. An unfamiliar number, but I answered anyway. "Mr. Miller? This is Richard Thornton from Thornton Legal Services in Des Moines. I'm your grandfather's attorney. We need to discuss his will as soon as possible. There are matters that require immediate attention. Will, estate, arrangements." Words that simply meant Grandpa wasn't coming back. I hung up and stared at the ceiling, tears finally breaking through. No one was there to see me cry. No one told me men don't cry. There was just me and these walls that had stood for 60 years. Shelter a man who taught me more about living than anyone else. My phone rang again. Mom this time, her tone sharp. Where are you? We've been calling for hours. At Grandpa's farm. I said, my voice rough and expected. Well, come home now. We need to talk about the funeral arrangements. She hung up before I could respond. Typical. Everyone always telling me where to be, what to do, how much money to bring. Even now, when the only person who ever really saw me was gone, I looked at the jar of rainbow corn on the shelf, remembering Grandpa's words. Plan it when you're ready. I wasn't ready to say goodbye, but life didn't wait for readiness. It just kept moving forward, whether you were prepared or not. The days after Grandpa's death passed in a fog of arrangements and phone calls. Funeral home decisions, newspaper obituary details, church service coordination, all these formalities that seemed so meaningless compared to the reality that Grandpa was gone. I spent most of that time at his farm, sleeping in his bed, sitting in his chair, as if somehow his essence might transfer to me if I occupied the spaces he'd left behind. Mom kept calling, insisting I help with the funeral planning. But I couldn't bear the thought of reducing Grandpa's life to flower arrangements and catering choices. The funeral was held 3 days later at First Baptist Church, a small white building that had stood in our town since the Civil War. Inside, it smelled of wood polish, oldham books, and the waxy scent of too many candles. The pews were filled with faces I recognized, neighbors, farmers who'd known Grandpa for decades, a few of my parents' friends who came out of obligation. Mom sat rigidly beside me, her face locked in that expression she wore when trying not to show emotion in public. Dad stared straight ahead, uncomfortable in his only suit. Megan kept checking her phone when she thought no one was looking. None of them had really known Grandpa, not like I had. The preacher spoke about a man he'd barely met, using generic phrases that could have applied to anyone who'd lived a long life and died respected in a small town. A pillar of the community, and now at peace with the Lord. Nothing about how Grandpa could identify every bird by its call, or the way he could predict rain 3 days out by the smell of the soil. After the service, we gathered at Monroe's cemetery where the same plot that held Grandma Ruth now opened to welcome her husband. People murmured condolences as they filed past. Sorry for your loss, and he was a good man, repeated so many times the words lost all meaning. My cousin Brad, who'd flown in from Arizona, stood beside me as they lowered the casket. Rough day, he said, his voice low. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Remember when Grandpa caught us smoking his pipe tobacco behind the barn? Brad asked. The memory hit unexpectedly, and I almost laughed despite everything. Instead of getting mad, he showed us how to do it properly. Said if we were going to be stupid, might as well be smart about it. Brad added, Mom was furious when she found out. Brad shifted uncomfortably. Heard he left you something in the will. 5 days after we buried Grandpa, I found myself in Richard Thornton's law office. The room was small, paneled in dark, wood that had probably been installed when Nixon was president. A portrait of Abraham Lincoln hung on the wall, watching the proceedings with solemn eyes. The air smelled of old paper and coffee. My parents and Megan sat in chairs alongside me. Mom had insisted they needed to be there for moral support, but the tension in the room suggested otherwise. Thornton, a balding man with reading glasses perched on his nose, shuffled papers importantly. Let's get to it, shall we? The last will and testament of Henry James Miller. I expected legal jargon and complicated inheritance tax explanations. What I got instead was a bombshell that changed everything. To my grandson, Jacob Miller, I leave my entire estate, consisting of the farm property at 1448, County Line Road, all 40 acres of land, the Ford F-150 pickup truck, my personal possessions including my record collection and all financial accounts listed in the attached documents. The room went completely silent. I could hear the ancient wall clock ticking. Even Thornton seemed surprised by the reaction, glancing up over his glasses. There must be some mistake, Mom finally said, her voice tight. No mistake, Mrs. Miller. Your father was very clear. Thornton slid a sealed envelope across the desk toward me. He also left this letter for Jake alone. I took the envelope with trembling hands. My name was written on the front in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. "What about the rest of us?" Megan demanded, looking up from her phone for the first time that day. Thornton cleared his throat. Mr. Miller specifically stated that his grandson Jacob was to receive everything. There are no other provisions. Mom's face had gone white, then red. "That's impossible. Dad would never." "I can assure you, the will is legally binding," Thornton interrupted. "Mr. Miller had it drawn up 6 months ago, with sound mind and proper witnesses." Dad, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Jake, you're going to do the right thing here, correct? Sell the property and split it with the family?" Everyone looked at me like I was suddenly holding all the cards. And I guess I was. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. Grandpa's handwriting, never the neatest, had become shakier in recent years. But the words were clear. "Jake, when a man gets old, he sees things more clearly. Who was there and who wasn't. Who listened and who just waited for their turn to talk. You held my hand when I was falling. You were the only one who never turned away from the land. You understood what it means to grow something, to be patient, to work for something beyond yourself. The farm is yours now, not because you're my grandson, but because you're the only one who ever saw it as more than just real estate. Remember what I taught you about the corn. Plant it when you're ready. Grandpa." I folded the letter and put it in my pocket before anyone could ask to see it. "Well," Mom demanded. "He left it to me." I said, simply, "And what are you going to do about it?" Dad asked, his voice carrying that tone parents use when they've already decided what your answer should be. I looked at each of them. Mom with her tightly controlled anger, Dad with his expectant stare, Megan rolling her eyes like this was all some massive inconvenience to her. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "I need to think." The drive home was Arctic cold, despite the spring weather. Mom stared out the passenger window, refusing to look at me. Dad gripped the steering wheel like he was strangling it. Megan had earbuds in, deliberately excluding herself from the family crisis. That night, I returned to my small apartment above Ted's garage. Through the thin walls, I could hear my phone buzzing repeatedly as my family called and texted. I turned it off and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Grandpa's letter on my chest like some kind of shield. A week passed. Easter Sunday arrived, and with it came the traditional family dinner that suddenly felt like walking into an ambush. I'd been staying at my apartment above Ted's garage, avoiding home as much as possible. But some traditions couldn't be escaped without causing even more drama, so I showed up at noon with a store-bought pie and a knot in my stomach. The house smelled of roasting turkey and simmering tension. Megan was setting the table, deliberately clinking silverware too loudly. Dad watched basketball on mute, pretending everything was normal. Mom bustled around the kitchen, her movements sharp and precise. We sat down to eat in painful silence. The only sounds were forks scraping plates and occasional requests to pass dishes. It lasted until Mom placed the last serving dish on the table, glazed carrots that nobody would eat, and remained standing. "Jake," she said, her voice falsely pleasant, "we need to discuss the farm situation. I've been waiting for this all week." "What about it?" "You need to sell it, obviously. Megan needs money for college. NYU accepted her, and the tuition is substantial." Dad nodded as if this was all perfectly reasonable. "The land alone is worth a couple $100,000. With a house and equipment, you could clear maybe $300. It's the practical thing to do." "That's Grandpa's whole life you're talking about selling," I said quietly. "Don't be dramatic," Mom replied. "It's real estate, and it's a burden you're not prepared to handle. Farming isn't some romantic fantasy. It's hard work that requires experience and capital, neither of which you have." "What she means," Megan interjected, "is don't embarrass us by playing farmer when you could actually do something useful with that money." Dad set down his fork. "The money belongs to the family, Jake, not just for your fantasies." Something shifted inside me. All those years of nodding and agreeing, of handing over envelopes of cash, of being the man of the family, while being treated like a child. It crystallized into a single, clear thought. No more. I pushed back from the table and stood, my hand shaking slightly, but my voice steady. No. No what? Mom asked, clearly confused by this unexpected resistance. No, I'm not selling the farm. It's mine. Grandpa wanted me to have it. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. If that's your attitude, Mom said icily, then you're no longer welcome in this house. Dad looked uncomfortable, but didn't contradict her. You owe this family, Jake. Every dollar we spent raising you, putting clothes on your back, food in your mouth. Yeah, Megan chimed in. Like that sweater. I wanted it, you said it was too expensive, but you bought yourself that stupid work jacket. She yanked the blue cashmere sweater I'd given her for Christmas from the back of her chair and threw it at me. Keep your hillbilly handouts. I caught the sweater reflexively. The room was spinning slightly, like I'd stood up too fast. We're trying to help you, Mom insisted. You're throwing your life away on some ridiculous fantasy about being a farmer. You fix cars, Jake. That's what you know. That's all you know. But for once, I saw through the manipulation. Grandpa's words from his letter echoed in my head. You were the only one who never turned away from a land. I'm leaving, I said calmly, tucking Megan's discarded sweater under my arm. Thanks for dinner. I walked out despite their continued protests, got into my truck, and tossed the sweater onto the passenger seat. As I drove away, a strange sensation washed over me, like I was shedding an old, too-tight skin. For all the anger and hurt churning inside me, there was also something else. Relief. I pulled over at Miller's Creek, the place I'd fished as a kid, sitting on the tailgate of my truck. I called Brad. Hey, what's up? He answered. Just blew up my family. I said, surprised at the steadiness in my voice. The will thing? Yeah, they wanted me to sell everything. Brad whistled low. Heavy. What are you going to do? Keep it. Try to make it work somehow. I tried to inject some humor into the bleak situation. At least your flight home was paid for. I got landed with a whole farm and family drama. Brad's laugh crackled through the phone. Yeah, and all I got was jet lag and Aunt Carol's terrible casserole at the reception. That made me smile for the first time in days. How much do you think I could get if I sold slightly used family resentment? Got plenty to spare. After hanging up, I sat watching the creek water flow, remembering how Grandpa used to take me fishing here. He'd taught me to be patient, to wait for the fish to come to me rather than chasing after them. Family isn't just blood, Jake, he'd told me once, after I complained about Megan breaking my model airplane. It's who stands beside you when you're at your lowest. Remember that. I was starting to understand what he meant. The people who share my DNA had just disowned me over money, while Grandpa, gone now, was still finding ways to hold me up. Rain began to fall as evening approached, gentle at first, then growing stronger. I started the truck and headed northeast, toward County Line Road, toward the farm, my farm. The windshield wipers couldn't quite keep up with the downpour. Water streamed across the glass like tears, blurring the headlights of passing cars. The roads grew darker and emptier as I left town behind. I stopped at my apartment only long enough to grab a duffel bag of clothes, my old guitar that hadn't been played in years, and the jar of rainbow corn seed from Grandpa's shelf. I'd brought it back to my place after the funeral, not wanting my family to find it and toss it out as junk. The darkness was nearly complete by the time I turned onto the gravel drive leading to the farmhouse. Rain hammered on the roof of the truck like impatient fingers. Lightning flashed, illuminating the silhouette of the house. My house now, standing alone against the elements. I cut the engine and sat listening to the storm, to the rhythmic drumming on metal and glass. For the first time in my life, I had made a decision that was entirely my own, not influenced by family obligation or guilt or the path of least resistance. I had no idea what I was doing, no plan for how to run a farm, how to make it profitable, how to even turn on the well pump or fix the sagging porch step. But as I grabbed my duffel bag and ran through the rain toward the dark house, key in hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Freedom. a future that belonged to me alone. Rain soaked through my jacket as I fumbled with the lock. The key turned, the door swung open, and I stepped inside. The house was cold and dark, smelling of emptiness and dust. But beneath that, the scent of pine soap and tobacco still lingered, Grandpa's presence, fading but not gone. I set my duffel bag on the floor, placed a jar of rainbow corn seeds on the kitchen counter, and leaned my guitar against the wall. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the room. The worn couch, the reading chair by the window, the bookshelf full of farming almanacs and Louis L'Amour paperbacks. This was mine now. All of it. The good and the bad, the potential and the problems. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time, I was actually looking forward to finding out. I woke up freezing. The kind of bone-deep cold that makes you question every life decision that led to this moment. Grandpa's farmhouse, my farmhouse now, had apparently decided overnight that heating was optional. Through the frosted window, the sun was just beginning to rise over fields that looked half prepared for planting. Grandpa had started tilling them before he got sick, but never finished the job. Welcome to day one of my brilliant new life as a farmer. The night before, I'd arrived in the rain, emotional and determined. By morning light, reality hit harder than my high school football coach. The house was dustier than I remember from my previous visits. When I turned on the shower, the pipes made a sound like a dying animal before spitting out rust-colored water. I found coffee in a tin can and made it on the old stove, half expecting the place to burn down around me. The first sip nearly stripped the enamel from my teeth. Grandpa always did like his coffee strong enough to wake the dead. My phone showed no service. Of course. I walked the property that morning, trying to see it through Grandpa's eyes instead of my panic ones. 40 acres seemed massive now that it was all my responsibility. The barn leaned slightly to the left, as if tired after decades of standing. The John Deere tractor I'd helped Grandpa fix dozens of times sat waiting, but I knew it would need work. Grandpa hadn't been able to maintain it properly during his final months. The fields were partially tilled, but not planted yet. Spring planting season was approaching fast, and I had no idea what I was going to do with all this land. Grandpa had shown me the basics of farm equipment operation and maintenance over the years, but there was a world of difference between weekend help and managing 40 acres alone. By noon, I'd made a to-do list so long it looked like a grocery receipt. Fix the loose shingles on the roof. Get the tractor running reliably again. Mend the fences where winter had taken its toll. Decide what to plant in those fields. Figure out Grandpa's irrigation system. Learn everything about actual farming in, about a week. I drove into town for supplies, ignoring the curious stares from locals who clearly recognized me as Henry Miller's grandson, but weren't sure what I was doing back. At the hardware store, I loaded up on essentials while the older man at the counter offered condolences about Grandpa. "Heard you inherited the place," he said, ringing up my purchases. "Your grandfather was a good man. You planning to farm it or sell?" "Farm it," I answered, surprised by my own certainty. He nodded, respect flickering across his weathered face. "Gonna be a tough row to hoe, son. But Henry taught you some, didn't he?" "Some," I admitted. "Not enough." "Nobody knows enough when they start," he said, handing me my receipt. Henry didn't either, back when he started after Vietnam. I left with supplies and an unexpected sense that maybe I wasn't completely crazy. If Grandpa could figure out starting from scratch, maybe I could too. That first week tested my resolve with an endless series of spring storms. The roof leaked in 2 places, forcing me to arrange buckets strategically. I slept in Grandpa's bedroom, using extra blankets to combat the cold until I figured out the temperamental furnace. The tractor became my main project. I knew engines. Fixing cars had been my job for years, but Grandpa's ancient John Deere had its own personality and quirks. Parts that should have worked didn't, and fixes that should have failed somehow succeeded. It was like the machine was testing me, seeing if I deserved to run it. When I finally got it running reliably, I felt more accomplished than I had after any car repair I'd ever done. I recorded myself starting it up, narrating dramatically. Day 5 of Jake Miller, mechanic turned farmer. After 3 days of cursing, bleeding, and threatening this tractor with the scrapyard, we have ignition. Grandpa, if you're watching from somewhere, I hope you're laughing. I posted it online without thinking much about it. Just needed to share my small victory with someone, even if it was just a void of the internet. The jar of rainbow corn seed sat on Grandpa's kitchen shelf, where I'd placed it after bringing it from my apartment. Every morning, I looked at it while drinking coffee, remembering Grandpa's words about planting it when I was ready. I wasn't sure if I was ready yet, but I knew I wanted to honor his wishes. With the tractor working, I could finally finish preparing the field Grandpa had started. The work was tedious, but satisfying in a way fixing cars never had been. There was something fundamental about working the soil, preparing it to grow something. At the end of each exhausting day, I record another update from my impromptu video diary, joking about my mistakes and small victories. Day 8. Discovered that easy-to-assemble irrigation equipment was designed by someone with 6 hands and infinite patience. Also found out why Grandpa always wore a hat in the fields. My forehead is now approximately the color of a fire truck. To my surprise, people actually watched. Not many at first, but enough that I kept making them. There was something therapeutic about documenting my journey, turning challenges into self-deprecating humor rather than defeats. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of fence repair, I decided it was time. I took down the jar of rainbow corn and carefully sorted through the multicolored kernels. If any part of Grandpa's legacy deserved to be continued, it was this. I selected a small field near the house for the special corn. The soil there was better than average. Grandpa had always amended it with his special compost mixture. Using the knowledge he'd taught me about proper spacing and planting depth, I carefully planted each colorful seed. If these actually grow, I'll take it as a sign I'm doing something right, I told the empty air. Grandpa's rainbow unicorn corn, don't let me down. I recorded the planting for my video diary, making jokes about magical corn, while secretly hoping that somehow this connection to Grandpa would take root both literally and figuratively. 3 weeks into my farming adventure, my small online following had grown enough that people actually offered advice. Someone suggested an easier fix of the furnace that actually worked. Another viewer pointed me toward resources specifically for beginning farmers. The regular field was planted with conventional corn. The seed dealer in town had been surprisingly helpful when I explained my situation. But it was the rainbow cornfield that I checked obsessively every day. And then one morning I saw them, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil. But these weren't ordinary sprouts. They had a purplish tinge to their leaves, catching the light in a way that made them almost seem to shimmer. I was on my knees examining them when I heard a car coming up the driveway. The blue Honda Civic looked out of place against the rural backdrop, as did the woman who stepped out. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and university sweatshirt. "Hi there," she called. "Is this the Miller farm?" "Yeah," I answered, suddenly aware of my dirt-covered appearance. "I'm Jake Miller." "Sarah Jameson," she said, walking over. "I'm an agronomy student at Iowa State. We're doing a soil sampling project in the county, and your farm is on my list. Your grandfather used to let us test here every year." Sarah looked like she belonged in a university lab, not trudging around a farm. But there was something in her confident stride that suggested she was no stranger to agricultural work. I noticed a small tattoo of a wheat stalk on her wrist as she extended her hand. "I've been meaning to check in anyway," she continued. "The department heard about your grandfather's passing. He was well respected among our agricultural science faculty. I hadn't known that. There seemed to be a lot about Grandpa I was still discovering." As she talked, Sarah's gaze drifted to my rainbow corn sprouts. Her explanation about soil pH levels stopped mid-sentence. "What are those?" she asked, kneeling down for a closer look. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. My grandfather called it rainbow corn," said a buddy from Vietnam, gave him the seeds decades ago. He gave me the jar of seeds before he passed. Sarah studied the sprouts with increasing interest. "I've never seen anything like this. The leaf structure is unusual. You mind if I take a few measurements?" Before I could answer, She was already pulling scientific-looking tools from her backpack. I watched as she carefully examined the plants, taking photos with her phone and notes on a small pad. "This isn't a standard variety," she finally said, looking up with excitement in her eyes. "Not even close." "Yeah, I figured that out from the purple leaves," I replied, trying to sound like I had any clue about normal corn varieties. Sarah laughed, a genuine sound that made me realize how little actual human interaction I'd had in weeks. "It's more than that. The chlorophyll content alone is fascinating." I shrugged, tried to appear nonchalant, even as I felt a strange pride in my weird sprouts. Grandpa's magic corn, I guess. "Mind if I come back and monitor their growth? This could be really interesting from a research perspective." That was how Sarah became a regular visitor to my farm. She came initially for the corn, but soon started offering practical advice on everything else. As a student in sustainable agriculture, she had knowledge I desperately needed, while my mechanical skills complemented her theoretical understanding. "Your irrigation system needs adjustments for these sections," she said one day, pointing to areas of the conventional cornfield. "The slope means these rows get less water." 2 days later, we were reconfiguring the system together. My knowledge of mechanics, combined with her agricultural expertise, made us a surprisingly effective team. "Why are you helping me?" I finally asked one evening as we sat on the porch, drinking beers after a long day of work. I'm clearly still learning the ropes here. Sarah considered the question, taking a slow sip from her bottle. "Partly the corn. I'm genuinely fascinated by whatever variety that is. Partly because I respect what you're doing. Making a mess of everything. Taking a risk. Most people would have sold this place in a heartbeat. My parents lost their family farm because nobody in my generation wanted to keep it going. A month into my farming experiment, I woke one morning to find Sarah's car already in the driveway. I found her kneeling by the rainbow corn, which had now grown remarkably fast and was developing what looked like tiny, multicolored tassels. "Jake, you need to see this," she said without looking up. "These plants are showing growth patterns I've never seen before. The genetic structure must be completely unique." "Is that good or bad?" I asked, handing her the coffee I'd started making automatically whenever she visited. "It's incredible. These could potentially be extremely drought-resistant and nutrient-rich. Where did your grandfather get these again?" "Vietnam. He said his buddy brought them back after the war." I sat down beside her. "He kept them all these years but never planted them. Said I should plant them when I was ready." Sarah looked at me with new interest. "And you think you're ready now?" The question hit deeper than she probably intended. Was I ready? Ready to be responsible for this farm, for these strange plants, for my own life finally? Getting there, I answered honestly. A month ago, I couldn't even get the furnace working. Now I've got crops growing and a tractor that runs reliably. Sarah became more than just a visitor or advisor. She was a friend, maybe the first real one I'd had in years. We worked side by side most days. She brought agricultural knowledge. I contributed mechanical skills and an increasing collection of calluses. One evening, as thunderclouds gathered on the horizon, we sat on the porch watching the distant lightning. Sarah had brought sandwiches from town, a welcome change from my basic cooking. "The land isn't just a business, Jake," she said thoughtfully. "It's a conversation. You listen to what it needs. It responds to how you treat it." I nodded, though some of her more philosophical farming ideas still went over my head. Sarah had studied agricultural science, but she approached farming with an almost spiritual respect that reminded me of Grandpa. Wendell Berry wrote that to grow the land is to grow yourself, she continued. I think that's what's happening here. I looked at my hands, now calloused and tan where they had once been stained with motor oil. Maybe she was right. Maybe the farm wasn't just changing under my care. It was changing me too. My online videos had developed a small but dedicated following. People seemed entertained by my honest documentation of farm failures and occasional successes. I called the rainbow corn sprouts Grandpa's unicorns, a joke that became a running theme. If these things bloom with actual rainbows, I'll eat my diploma. Sarah laughed when I showed her the latest video. We had developed an easy rhythm together. She brought scientific knowledge and books. I provided mechanical skills and increasingly less terrible coffee. On weekends, she stayed later, helping me plan the next stages of the farm, or just talking on the porch as the sun set. Your sister commented on your latest video. Sarah mentioned one evening, scrolling through her phone, "Go back to the garage where you belong." I snorted. Megan's still mad I didn't sell the farm to fund her NYC adventure. Does it bother you? The family situation. I considered the question seriously. Less than it should. Probably. I miss who I thought they were. That makes sense. But I'm starting to think Grandpa was right about what makes a real family. By the 6-week mark, the rainbow corn had grown taller than me, with stalks that shimmered almost metallically in certain lights. The leaves remained a deep purple-green, and the developing ears showed hints of the multiple colors that had given the variety its name. My other projects were progressing too. The conventional corn was growing well. The barn no longer looked like it might collapse in a strong breeze. I'd even started thinking about possibly getting a few chickens next season. For the first time since arriving, I felt like I might actually belong here, that I might not be completely failing at this farming thing after all. One morning, I checked my phone to find that my latest video, showing the progress of the rainbow corn, had somehow gone viral overnight. Hundreds of thousands of views, thousands of comments, most expressing amazement at the unusual plants. I was still staring at the screen in disbelief when Sarah pulled up earlier than usual. "Have you checked your phone?" she asked immediately, practically bouncing with excitement. "Yeah, what the hell? How did this happen?" Someone from the Sustainable Agriculture Department shared it, and then it just exploded. "Jake, I've been getting calls since 7 a.m. People want to know about your corn." Before I could process this information, my phone rang with an unknown number. Normally I'd let it go to voicemail, but with everything happening, I answered. "Is this Jacob Miller?" asked a polished voice. "This is Thomas Reynolds from Future Initiatives. We're very interested in discussing your unique corn variety. Our company specializes in next-generation biofuels and sustainable agriculture solutions." I listened as he explained how they'd seen my video, how their scientists were intrigued by what appeared to be a previously unknown corn variety with potentially revolutionary properties. "We'd like to send a team to your farm as soon as possible. We believe this could be the beginning of a very profitable partnership." After hanging up, I relayed the conversation to Sarah. Her initial excitement faded to cautious concern. "BioFuture is a huge agribusiness corporation," she said slowly. "They're involved in everything from genetically modified crops to biofuels. They have serious money and resources. Isn't that good? They can help figure out what this corn actually is." Sarah's expression remained troubled. "Just be careful, Jake. Companies like that are primarily interested in patents and profits. Your grandfather saved those seeds for a reason." That evening, as Sarah and I sat on the porch steps watching fireflies appear over the fields, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear about what might come next, pride in what I'd accomplished so far, and something else I wasn't quite ready to name when I looked at Sarah. "What would you do?" I asked her. "About BioFuture?" She considered the question carefully. "It's your decision, but remember why you kept this place. It wasn't to get rich quick." I nodded, watching the rainbow corn stalks sway gently in the evening breeze. They seemed to glow slightly in the fading light, as if illuminated from within. "Grandpa said to plant the seeds when I was ready," I said quietly. I think I finally understand what he meant. Sarah's hand found mine in the gathering darkness, and together we watched night fall over the farm that was slowly and probably becoming my home. I'd never owned a tie before. The one currently strangling me was borrowed from Tom at the hardware store, who insisted I couldn't meet with corporate types, wearing my usual flannel and jeans. The fabric felt like a python slowly constricting around my neck as I sat in Future Initiative's downtown Des Moines office. Everything gleamed with chrome and glass. The coffee they'd offer me probably cost more than what I'd spend on groceries in a week. Across the polished conference table sat 3 executives in matching dark suits. Their PowerPoint presentation was on slide 15, full of phrases like market penetration and biofuel revolution. My rainbow corn filled the projection screen, its vibrant colors somehow looking wrong in this sterile environment. Sarah sat beside me, calm and composed in a simple blazer. I'd asked her to come as my advisor, though really I just needed moral support. She took notes occasionally, her expression unreadable as a lead executive. Reynolds talked about projected profits in the millions. Your grandfather stumbled onto something extraordinary, Mr. Miller, Reynolds said, clicking to a slide showing molecular diagrams. Our preliminary tests on the samples you allowed us to take show unprecedented ethanol conversion rates. This corn could revolutionize the biofuel industry. I nodded like I understood all the technical jargon, though most of it went over my head. What I did understand was the number on the next slide, their initial offer for exclusive rights to my corn. We're prepared to offer you $2 million for the patent rights to this core variety, Reynolds stated, leaning forward slightly, plus ongoing royalties of 2% on all related products. $2 million. More money than I could comprehend. Enough to pay off any farm debt, buy new equipment, fix everything that needed fixing, and still have plenty left over. Of course, another executive added, we'd need the entire seed stock and exclusive cultivation rights. Our research division would take over development from there. I felt Sarah tense slightly beside me. When I glanced at her, she gave me a subtle look I was learning to read well. Caution. What exactly would you do with it? I asked, my first words in nearly 20 minutes. Reynolds smiled. Develop it, of course. Isolate the genetic components that make it so efficient for biofuel conversion. Scale up production using our agricultural partners. Eventually, we could see rainbow fuel, catchy name, right? At gas stations across America. It sounded impressive. But something fell off about handing over Grandpa's seeds to a corporation that saw them only as dollar signs. I need time to think about it, I said finally. Reynolds nodded understandingly, though I caught the flash of disappointment. Of course, this is a major decision. Take the weekend. We'll reconnect on Monday. The drive back to the farm was quiet. Sarah stared out the window as Iowa farmland scrolled past. The spring fields now lush with green. They're lowballing you, she finally said. That corn is worth way more than $2 million. That's more money than I've ever imagined having. It's not about the money, Jake. It's about what happens to the corn. Once they own it, they control it. Farmers would have to license it back from them at whatever price they set. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. So what should I do? I'm just one guy with 40 acres. What did your grandfather tell you about those seeds? She asked instead of answering directly. I thought back to his words. That they were special. That I should plant them when I was ready. Not that you should sell them to the first corporation that waves money in your face, Sarah pointed out. She was right, and I knew it. Grandpa had kept those seeds for decades, waiting for the right time, the right person. He hadn't treated them as a commodity to be sold. By the time we reached the farm, I'd made my decision. Monday morning found me back in that tie, back in that gleaming office. But this time I spoke first. I'm not selling the patent rights, I stated flatly. Reynolds blinked in surprise. Mr. Miller, perhaps you didn't fully understand our offer. $2 million is... Not enough, I interrupted. But that's not the point. I'm not selling at any price. The executives exchanged glances. Then why are you here? Reynolds asked carefully. To make a counterproposal. I leaned forward. I'll grow the corn on my farm. I'll partner with you for distribution and processing. But the seeds stay with me. Reynolds laughed like I'd told a joke. Mr. Miller, with all due respect, you're a small-scale farmer, a former mechanic. If I understand correctly, developing a new crop variety requires resources, expertise, infrastructure. I have the only seed that work, I reminded him, and I have something your labs don't, the land where it thrives. We could just reverse engineer from the samples. You could try, Sarah interjected smoothly, but preliminary analysis suggests unique environmental epigenetic factors. The same seeds grown elsewhere don't express the same fuel conversion properties. You need Jake's land and Jake's expertise. I had no idea if that was true, but Sarah delivered it with such scientific confidence that Reynolds hesitated. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "You can't possibly scale this up alone." "Watch me," I replied, standing up. It felt good, like I was finally standing up for something that mattered. "If you're interested in my terms, you know where to find me." Walking out of that office was terrifying and exhilarating. I'd just turned down more money than I'd ever seen in my life. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was making a choice my grandfather would be proud of. That, Sarah said as we hit the parking lot, was either the bravest or stupidest negotiation I've ever witnessed. The next few months were a blur of activity. I took out a small business loan using the farm as collateral, a risk, but a calculated one. With Sarah's help, I developed a business plan focusing on sustainable growth. We converted more acreage to the rainbow corn, carefully preserving seeds from each harvest to expand our planting. Word spread about what we were doing. A local news station ran a story about the mechanic-turned-farmer with miracle corn. My social media following exploded, with people suddenly interested in sustainable agriculture and alternative fuels. I hired Tom, a Vietnam veteran like Grandpa who knew every piece of farm equipment ever made. Then came Lisa, a single mom from town who started helping with bookkeeping and ended up becoming our operations manager. By midsummer, we had 5 full-time employees, all local people who needed work. The first year was the hardest. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made a colossal mistake. The loan payments loomed. The weather didn't always cooperate. Equipment broke down. But each morning, I walked the fields at sunrise, watching the rainbow corn grow taller, its unusual colors catching the early light, and something inside me would settle. Sarah split her time between finishing her degree and helping at the farm. She set up a small research lab in what had been Grandpa's tool shed, analyzing soil samples and conducting growth experiments. "We need to understand why it grows better here," she explained. "My theory is it has something to do with the specific soil microbiome your grandfather developed over decades of organic farming." By the second year, we had our first real commercial harvest. A small regional biofuel producer agreed to buy our entire crop at premium prices. They were a family-owned business, not a corporate giant, and they shared our vision of keeping farming local and sustainable. The money was good, not millions, but enough to pay off half the loan, upgrade equipment, and install solar panels on the barn roof. We named the operation Legacy Acres Farm and had a sign painted for the entrance. News of our success traveled. Other farmers began stopping by, curious about our methods. I found myself hosting impromptu workshops, sharing what we'd learned about sustainable farming practices. Sarah was the brains behind most of it. She could explain the science of what we were doing in terms anyone could understand. I handled the practical side, showing people how to modify equipment, how to troubleshoot common problems, how to work with the land instead of against it. Somewhere along the way, my relationship with Sarah shifted. It wasn't dramatic, like in movies. There was no sudden kiss in the rain or grand declaration. It was quieter than that. Me making sure coffee was ready when she arrived each morning, her bringing books she thought I'd like, the way our conversation stretched later into the evening. One night, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies, she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. I sat there, not moving, barely breathing, feeling like I'd been given something precious and fragile. 3 years after I'd walked away from BioFuture's offer, Legacy Acres was supplying rainbow corn to biofuel producers across 3 states. We'd purchased the neighboring 40 acres when old Mr. Peterson decided to retire. The farm now employed 15 people full-time, all with health insurance and profit sharing. Things I'd insisted on from the start. We'd also started an education program for local schools. Kids would visit the farm, plant seeds, learn where food comes from. Sarah developed most of the curriculum. But I loved leading the tours, seeing the wonder on their faces when they saw the rainbow corn for the first time. "You're good with them," Sarah said one day, watching me show a group of 3rd graders how to check soil moisture. "They ask better questions than adults," I replied. One Sunday afternoon, a familiar SUV pulled into our driveway. I was fixing the irrigation pump when I looked up to see my parents and Megan standing awkwardly by their car. 3 years had passed with only terse text messages between us. I'd sent Christmas cards. They'd sent nothing. Yet here they were, looking out of place against a backdrop of thriving fields and busy farm buildings. Mom spoke first. "Your father saw a segment about your farm on the news." Her voice carried that forced casualness she used when trying to bridge uncomfortable situations. "We thought we'd come see for ourselves." Dad nodded stiffly. "Place looks good, Jake." Megan, now in her early 20s and dressed like she just stepped out of New York fashion magazine, looked around with poorly disguised disdain. "So this is what you chose over helping your family." The old me might have apologized, might have tried to make peace at any cost. But I'd changed more than just my occupation over the past 3 years. "This is what I built while you were deciding I wasn't family anymore." I replied evenly. "Would you like a tour?" The tour was awkward but revealing. Dad actually showed interest in the equipment modifications I'd made. Mom asked questions about the business side. Megan remained aloof until we reached the education center, where she unexpectedly engaged with the displays Sarah had designed. At the main house, renovated now, but still recognizably Grandpa's place, Mom finally addressed the elephant in the room. "We were wrong about this place, Jake, about what you could do with it. We just wanted security for you," Dad added. "Farming seemed too risky." "I'm not mad anymore," I told him truthfully. "This place taught me what matters." Megan, who had been scrolling through her phone, looked up suddenly. "My marketing degree program needs an internship project. Your social media could use a professional touch." I raised an eyebrow. "This is a working farm, Megan, not a fashion brand." "Sustainable agriculture is trending," she replied with the first genuine interest I'd seen from her. "You're sitting on a gold mine of content and doing nothing with it." I looked at her skeptically. "We don't do handouts here. Everyone works." "I'm not asking for a handout. I'm offering a business proposal." They left without any grand reconciliation. There were too many hurt feelings, too much history for that. But something had shifted. Mom hugged me goodbye. Dad shook my hand with something approaching respect. Even Megan's farewell lacked its usual sharp edge. After they drove away, I found Sarah in the research greenhouse. That went better than expected. I told her, "Families are complicated," she replied, adjusting settings on her monitoring equipment. "But they can surprise you." Speaking of surprises, I said, "Megan might be coming back with a marketing proposal." Sarah laughed. "The family that said you'd fail as a farmer now wants it on success?" Life's funny that way. I admitted, 3 years ago, I was just a mechanic handing over my paycheck. Now I got employees, solar panels, and apparently a sister who thinks our farm is trending content. "Are you going to let her help?" Sarah asked. "Maybe, on the farm's terms, not hers." I looked around at what we'd built, the thriving fields, the research facility, the education center. Grandpa used to say that real wealth isn't what's in your bank account. It's what you leave behind that matters. Sarah smiled, taking my hand. "He'd be proud of what you're leaving behind." The next morning, I stood at the edge of our largest rainbow cornfield, watching the sun rise over plants that seemed to catch fire with the first light. Sarah was in the distance, showing the group of visiting agricultural students how to take soil samples. My phone buzzed with a notification. Megan had posted something on TikTok about her crazy brother who turned down millions to grow magic corn. It had already gone viral. I should have been annoyed, but instead I found myself laughing. Maybe I was crazy. I'd walked away from fortune, worked myself to exhaustion, risked everything on multicolored seeds from a war zone half a century ago. But watching Sarah now, her face animated as she explained something to the students, I felt a sense of peace I'd never known before. The farm hummed with purpose around me. People working, crops growing, a future being built one day at a time. Maybe Megan was right. Maybe this was crazy. But as I walked towards Sarah and the students, ready to start another day on the land that had changed everything, I couldn't help thinking that sometimes crazy looks an awful lot like happiness. 5 years have passed since I nearly sold Grandpa's legacy for a quick payday. Now I'm sitting on the porch of what used to be his farmhouse, now mine and Sarah's home, watching the fields of rainbow corn shimmer in the late afternoon light. The colors ripple like a fallen rainbow captured by the land, nature's own stained glass. Sarah sits beside me in Grandpa's old rocking chair, the one piece of original furniture I refuse to replace during the renovations. She's reading from a bundle of yellowed papers, Grandpa's letters from Vietnam that we found in the attic last winter. Her voice is soft as she reads his words about missing the Iowa soil, about how he dreamed of fields while surrounded by jungle. I close my eyes, listening. Sometimes I forget that the miracle corn that transformed our lives came from that same war-torn land, carried home by a young soldier who understood the value of growing things. Legacy Acres has become more than just a farm. It's a community hub, a research center, an education campus. On any given day, you might find agricultural students taking soil samples, local farmers testing new equipment, or elementary school kids learning where food comes from. The farm has grown to over 200 acres now. The rainbow cornfields are our centerpiece, but we've diversified organic vegetables, heritage grain varieties, even an experimental orchard. 3 modern greenhouses gleam in the distance, where we grow year-round regardless of Iowa's temperamental weather. I've kept the operation true to what I think Grandpa would have wanted. We employ people that other businesses overlook. Bill, a Vietnam vet with PTSD, who turns out to be a mechanical genius. Martha, a retired teacher who now runs our education program. Kyle, a troubled kid from the county group home, who's becoming our best drone operator. Everyone deserves a chance to grow something, I tell new employees. It sounds cheesy, but I mean it. This land gave me a chance when I was just a lost mechanic with grease-stained hands. I'm just paying it forward. Sarah and I got married 2 years ago, a simple ceremony right here on the farm. We exchanged vows next to the original patch of rainbow corn, which we still maintain separately just like I planted it that first uncertain spring. My parents came. Even Megan showed up, though she complained about her designer shoes getting muddy. Megan actually works for us now, running our social media and marketing from New York. Turns out her fashion and business sense translated perfectly to building our brand. She'll never admit it, but I think she's proud of what we created here. Every Sunday, Sarah and I have a ritual. After the week's work is done, we sit on this porch while she reads one of Grandpa's letters. They're like a guidebook he left behind, full of observations about the land, about farming, about life. The letters to Grandma Ruth from Vietnam are especially meaningful, filled with hopes and dreams that eventually became this place. The land knows what you give it, he wrote in one letter. Treat it right, and it'll remember you long after you're gone. When Sarah reads these words, I often hold her hand, thinking how Grandpa would smile seeing us here together. Our life isn't perfect. We work harder than anyone I know. There are still days I wake up wondering if I know what the hell I'm doing. Sarah and I have epic arguments about everything from crop rotation to whether the kitchen needs new countertops. We're both stubborn people who think we're right about pretty much everything. But there's a rhythm to our disagreements now, a dance we both understand. She brings science and vision. I bring practicality and persistence. Somehow it works. The scale of what we built still surprises me sometimes. Last month, a major university sent researchers to study our soil microbiome. The week before, a delegation from Vietnam visited to learn about our sustainable farming methods, a full-circle moment that left me speechless. The rainbow corn has become our signature. It powers vehicles throughout the Midwest, a clean-burning biofuel that's changing how people think about energy. But more importantly, it's become a symbol of what's possible when you listen to the land instead of just extracting from it. Today I recorded what's become a yearly tradition, a video for our followers showing the farm at peak season. Standing in the middle of the rainbow cornfield, I spoke directly to the camera. They used to call me a hick, a grease monkey playing farmer. But this land has a memory longer than any critic. Care for it, and it gives back tenfold. This isn't my farm. It's all of ours. A legacy we're building together. As the drone camera pulled back to show the vast, multicolored fields stretching the horizon, I felt that familiar mix of pride and humility. None of this was really my doing. I was just a caretaker. I could buy Pretty much anything now if I wanted. Fancy cars, a vacation house, all the things people think mean success. But watching the sunset paint our field gold, hearing Sarah's voice reading Grandpa's words about coming home to Iowa soil, I realized I already have everything worth having. The kids from the local elementary school visited yesterday. I couldn't resist my usual joke as we planted potatoes in the teaching garden. Remember, if you plant them upside down, they'll grow potato chips instead of potatoes. The kids erupted in laughter while Sarah rolled her eyes. "You're worse than my textbooks ever were," she muttered, but I caught her smile as she turned away. In one of his last letters home from Vietnam, Grandpa wrote something that's become my personal motto. Live, so the land remembers you, not for buildings or monuments, but for how you tended it, how you made it better than you found it. When I look across our farm now, the healthy soil, the diverse crops, the people who found purpose here, I think maybe I'm on my way to living up to that ideal. I'm not just existing on this land. I'm leaving something behind that matters. The sun sets completely now, painting the sky in colors that rival our corn. Sarah finishes reading and folds the letter carefully back into its envelope. In the distance, the last farm vehicle returns to the equipment barn, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. "Grandpa will be proud," Sarah says, taking my hand. I nod, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in my throat. 5 years ago, I was lost, angry, handing over my paycheck to a family that saw me as nothing but a wallet. Now I found my place in the world, not just a job or a home, but a purpose. This land that once belonged to a Vietnam vet who believed in second chances has given me mine. And in return, I've tried to honor what he built, to expand on his vision, to make this piece of Iowa earth into something that will outlast me. The rainbow corn waves gently in the evening breeze, almost like it's saying goodbye to another day, another season, another year of growth. I squeeze Sarah's hand, feeling grateful for everything. The struggles, the victories, the daily work that gives life meaning. Grandpa was right about the seeds, about waiting until I was ready, about the land having a memory longer than any human. I'm home, and that's enough.